be talking about clean architecture with .NET 9. We're looking at Ardalis's clean architecture template. And initially I was going to show version 10.0.0, but as of within the past hour, we've got an update. So I will be showing you the latest and greatest, which is version 10.0.1. Now we are streaming both in Zoom and on YouTube today. Next month, we will be just straight to YouTube. So heads up on that change. If you have any questions, please ask either in the chat in Zoom or in the chat in YouTube. We'll answer the questions as best as we can. If you are going through this and you're wondering where do we get the links, rest assured if you signed up for the thank you email, you will get a thank you email probably tomorrow morning. For those watching this after the recording, you will get a thank you email when you sign up for the email itself. Okay, so we've got our clean architecture with .NET 9. Now, I want to make sure I level set with you all. I'm not going to go through the what is clean architecture, what are the different layers, what are the rules. We do that in so many other webinars and blog posts and in our course. So at the end of this presentation, I'll be able to include some links for you to learn more, but just know we're not going into those details. Today, we're going to look at what's new in the template with the .NET 9 release. So .NET 9 was released this month, earlier in the month. And so the template has changed a little bit. Now, this template is open source. So I want you to understand that the things I'm going to show you today are not necessarily, oh, Ardalis put this in on the template himself. So we're going to be calling out the community contributions and showing that this is a community effort. So just so you can see what we're working with, there's going to be some slides and then some demos. And I'll point out as we go through each of the demos where the demo is coming from. So first of all, just so you can see, no tricks up my sleeve, I am running Ardalis's Clean Architecture Template version 10.0.1. I got this when I ran my .NET New Details. So that way you can see what version are we working with. And it looks like we just need to update a little bit more of the documentation because I see a .NET 8 and C# 12 in there. Those are actually using .NET 9 and C# 13. .NET New install Ardalis.cleanarchitecture.template. This will get you the latest template. Now, if you're taking my clean architecture course, I call out a specific version. That course is not updated for the new template. That is using the version 9 template. But today's demo is version 10. First thing that everybody has been hearing about is .NET 9. .NET 9 is the new thing. It is the latest of the standard support. So it is not the 2-year support, it's the 1 year. We'll go in here, so .NET updates. This started with a pull request from Kyle McMaster. Thanks for the contribution there, Kyle. He brought in .NET 9 RC2. And so some of the things that you'll notice in the template is that there's an update in the GitHub Actions to tell it to use .NET 9. The directory build props has a .NET reference in there for the framework version. Directory packages props, there are different updates for the packages that are using .NET 9, including fast endpoints, including XUnit's runner within Visual Studio. So that's what you'll see with .NET 9 for that. Then we have global JSON. Global.json, I need to preface this as to why this is important to know about. If you have an application where you're running your .NET tools and you want it to run a particular version of .NET, so you're in the command and you're like, okay, .NET version, that version is going to have whatever the global JSON is. If there's a global JSON in the project that you're working on or in the solution you're working on, that's going to be specific for that project or solution. And that will have the rules for what's your major version, minor version, patch version, what's your roll forward rules, things like that are in your global JSON. That determines what version, when you run your .NET command, that's the version it's going off of is in your global JSON. And then in the web project file, there are changes for entity framework core design, and it's that they have private assets and include assets. Now, that's really about it for the .NET 9 update. There's not really much in there in terms of the .NET 9 features. There's a lot of .NET 9 features, so I will include links for resources for .NET 9. But in terms of the template, there's not a lot of heavy lifting. So you can get .NET 9 today, and I will post that link in our YouTube chat so that you have it. All right. So that's .NET 9, and we'll take a look at those files when we get into a demo. I don't want to keep going back and forth between slides and demos too much, but I'll show you the .NET 9 stuff once we get in there. The next thing I want to show, though, is .NET Aspire. So with the .NET 9 release at .NET Conf, there was a lot of talk of Aspire. I was watching a gentleman in the community who captured the likes of .NET Conf and how much things were said. Like how many times was Blazor said, how many times .NET Aspire said, and Aspire was said a lot. So the template for Ardalis' clean architecture template now has Aspire support. And so I'll run a demo and you'll get to see this is what it looks like. But I need to caution you with .NET Aspire. So .NET Aspire from .NET 8 versus .NET 9 have two different installation approaches. And if you have .NET 8 already installed, you still need to go through the process for .NET 9. In .NET 8, Aspire was a workload. So you do the .NET install workload and trigger Aspire that way. In .NET 9, it's a different story. So Aspire is an SDK, and the Aspire project templates are in a NuGet package. Now that said, so then let's say you have .NET 8 already installed. You have Aspire already installed as a workload. You have your .NET 9 installed, but you didn't install the SDK. Is Aspire broken? Not necessarily. The Aspire features from .NET 8 will be working just fine, but .NET 9, no guarantees. So you need to install that SDK. If you go into the Visual Studio installer for the ASP.NET workloads, you just need to check that Aspire SDK. Once you check that and tell it modify, it'll add the SDK for you. So be warned, Aspire has changed their installation, and if you already have it installed with .NET 8, you will want to reinstall it for .NET 9 with the SDK approach. All right, so in the clean architecture template, this is what we have for Aspire support. We want to thank Benjamin Mishra for the contribution. And it adds Aspire host, service defaults, and Aspire test projects. And then you opt into the Aspire using -- Aspire when you create a new solution to include Aspire. So let me switch over to Visual Studio. And we'll open up our Clean Arch Aspire demo. Now, Clean Arch Aspire demo has no code changes from creating a new solution. So I did and I'm going to close all these just so that we're not getting a lot of things going on. So as you can see with our packages, we've got our Aspire host, we've got our core infrastructure. So core infrastructure, use cases, and web are our standard clean architecture template projects for our Ardalis template, Aspire host, service defaults, and the tests, which are down here in Aspire tests, are new projects. Now, that said, Aspire tests, just so you can see, there's really not much in there other than a link to the documentation. So if you find that you need to customize Aspire and you actually need to test it, we do have a link in there for the guide. Just so you can see what service defaults, what's going on in there. So service defaults is part of the standard setup for Aspire. So you can see there's the open telemetry. So OTel, if you hear me say OTel, it's open telemetry. That's how they address it. There's the health checks. There's service discovery. There's a resilience handler. Here's more adding the telemetry instrumentation for .NET Core, the client, the runtime. If there are other instrumentation things that you need to add, you can. If you want to export to something other than OTLP, which is the Open Telemetry Protocol, you can customize that in here as well. If you have other health checks you need to add, other endpoints you need to change, all that happens here in service defaults. And then the Aspire host, I'm going to expand that. So you can see right now the Aspire host only has the one project web, but let's say we had our API, which is web, and then maybe we have a Blazor front end, and we could add that in here as well. So this is what's going on with the Aspire part. Now to show, again, no tricks up my sleeves. I got long sleeves on today because it's cold here. But I'm going to go ahead and run my application. And we'll bring it over. Now, if you were already running version 10.0.0 of this template, you would have seen this showing localhost and not the Swagger part. So I had put in an issue to make a better user experience, and Ardalis fixed that this morning. And so now we go to the Swagger. Because initially it was going to a file not found page. And if you're not familiar with the project, file not found would just be more confusing. So again, you can see we're in Aspire. I'll show you the console once we navigate. So we've got our Swagger. This is the to-do. So we have our contributors. Now, because I am in our template, this is a solution that was created with the template. It just has the contributors as a starting point. So you could easily take these out if you wanted to, just so you can see, execute. And there are my contributors, Ardalis and Snowfrog. Those are our default contributors. If I go into my Aspire, if I go to my console, I want to change my resource to web. We've got logging in there. We have navigatable links, which are pretty neat to see. So you can see where the people were going and see what was called. All that logging is there. If you want to see like what is structured logs, we don't have any structured logs for this setup. Any traces, so you want to see how things work. So if you haven't worked with .NET Aspire yet, know that our clean architecture template now supports it. And it's easy to see all the different metrics and telemetry and to even add your own custom one. We did do a webinar on Aspire a few months ago, and I'll include that link in the notes. But that way you can see the benefits of Aspire and how easy it is to just include it in your applications nowadays. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this. And let's go back to the slides. Any questions so far? Okay, rest assured, I am watching both our YouTube chat and our Zoom chat, so as you have questions, please ask. All right, another feature that got added to the Ardalis' Clean Architecture template in the version 10s is the architecture decision records. If there's anything you know about me, I get excited when I see documentation. And that's what we have. So thanks to Zaki Khan for this contribution. It includes documentation. I just get super excited about documentation, especially when it's things like, why did we make this decision when we did? Because future us will not have the context that we do today when we make our decisions. Future us will not remember what we evaluated as other options and what we eliminated as other options. They won't remember any of that context that we have today. So you capture that context, you capture the decision, you capture the analysis process of it all. So we have not a sample, and it's actually the first official ADR, and that's talking about replacing AutoFac with .NET's built-in dependency injection framework. What's nice is this incorporates community feedback into the decision-making process, and it also establishes a framework for future ADRs. So let me show you what that looks like. So I'm going to select my link here. And again, rest assured, these links will all be in the thank you email. So if you're like, oh, how does she keep track of all these links? I have a links problem. All right, we'll bring this over here. So I am in the Ardalis Clean Architecture GitHub repository. I'm in the main branch. There's a docs folder and then an architecture decisions folder within that. Now the README explains what is an ADR, the purpose of them, the best practices for them, the versioning, how to start using them, any conventions, things like that. We do have a webinar that covers that, so I will add a link to that as well so that we have that in there. But notice now we have an architecture decision record. You give a number to it. General, what did you do? The status is accepted because this was a decision that was already made. Then we have to set that context. I can't stress this part enough with the context because, again, future you, and by future you, this could be future you 6 months from now. This could be future you a month from now with distractions all around you. This could be future you an hour from now, and it's just that chaotic around you. I've seen architects who've had that. It's a bad day. But capture that context of your decision. What are you trying to solve? And what did you look at? Initially, the clean architecture template did have AutoFac, and now it does use Microsoft's built-in DI because it has gotten better over the years. And then you can see here there's improved support through extension methods and things like that. Looking at the decision, so the decision is how did that decision come to be? What are the consequences of making these decisions? Consequences could be good, could be bad. I know so many times we see consequences as a bad thing, but that's not necessarily the case. And then, of course, are there any other references that should be there for your decision that you made? Like, what are the things that you used or what are the things that you considered? So architecture decision records is now part of the V10 template. All right. So we looked at .NET 9, we looked at .NET Aspire, we looked at architecture decision records have been added. The next feature I want to show you is global usings. So global usings, thanks to Amin Sharifi for this contribution. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to put all those long using statements that we use in every file in a project. We can put it in its own global usings file called globalusings.cs. This is done at the project level, and it's one point of making updates rather than having to visit each and every file that calls those usings. So I'll show you what that looks like. So we'll bring back my Visual Studio. All right. So we're back in Visual Studio. Again, this is my Clean Arch Aspire project. I created this when I did the .NET new clean-arch --aspire-o clean arch aspire. And what I want to show for this for the global usings, so I'm in my Solution Explorer and I want to just do a search for global usings so you can see the filtering right then and there. So each project has their own global usings file. This global usings is not new to .NET 9, but it is a feature that was added to the template that makes managing our usings a little bit easier and cleans up the files a bit. So the convention, again, name it global usings.cs, capital G for global, capital U for usings, and it goes in the project. If we look at one of those, not the project file, but the global usings, notice the syntax is global space using, and then whatever you're doing for global using. So then if we were to look, that's at core. When I go to the core project, and if I were to look at one of the other things, so let's say I want to look at contributor, there's the namespace, but I don't have all those usings in there. Same deal for like the handler. There are usings, don't get me wrong. The classes and the files can have their own usings, but then one that you see everywhere goes in the global using. So that was pretty neat feature to see. Again, thanks to Amin Sharifi for that contribution. MIMEkit email sender. So MIMEkit email sender is used in our clean architecture template. Thanks to Saman Azadi for this contribution. And we're now using connect async instead of just connect, the synchronous approach. So if we look in here, and if we do a search for our MIMEkit sender, MIMEkit email sender, there it is. Oops. And specifically here on line 16, They are now connecting asynchronous. So you can see those changes as well. Now I see Steve is on the call, so we'll see if Steve's going to have more to add on this. But another feature that I saw that he added into the sample is something called Vogen, which is dealing with generating our value objects. And I give a thanks to Steve Dunn for assisting in incorporating this into the sample. It is pronounced Vogen, and it's for value objects generator. It is an opinionated value object generator. I think he technically calls it semi-opinionated, but the way I see it is if you have opinions, you have opinions. There's no semi about that. But it solves the problem of primitive obsession. So think about your objects, think about your entities, and how many primitives you have, and all of the primitives in there. Lots of ints, lots of strings, things like that. But if you use Vogen, Vogen can help to turn those into value objects. Now, these are some of the opinions that I saw when I was looking into Vogen. I just looked into it fairly recently, so I'm not as well versed, but they have a from method. It's a factory method, and that's what they use to create the value objects. Those value objects must be equatable. You have validation, and you get that validation through a validate method with a validation object coming back. But if that validation is invalid, it'll get that value object validation exception. The sample does deal with EF core. And so in our EF core files, you'll see that has value generator for IDs. Then you'll see Vogen conversions for properties that need that conversion. The EF core converter. Steve, do you happen to be around, and do you happen to have any more insight or thoughts you want to share on Vogen?
Sure. Do you have the code for the sample handy?
Yeah, I'm about to flip over to my sample to do in Visual Studio and bring it over. Where do you want me to go?
If you check out the source, there's two different aggregates. One's for the contributor and one's for the project.
Okay.
And I left them different so that you can kind of compare how they both work. So if you look at contributor.cs, it's the simpler one. It's just a single entity.
Yep.
And it's not using Vogen at all. And so it's using entity base, which means it's just getting an ID. I think it's an integer ID by default. And then if you notice, there was someone offered some feedback, I forget who, that there was duplication in enforcing a rule for names, which was that they couldn't be null or empty. And so a proposal was made to use a function to combine them. So if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see the set name function basically does the guard clause to make sure it's not null or empty, and then assigns it to the name property there. The issue with this, the reason, and then it's called from both update name and from the constructor where it's created. The issue with this is that you basically should never be calling class methods from inside the constructor because the class hasn't even been constructed yet. So it's not necessarily in a valid state. And so this is, I should probably add a comment or something here. This is an example of what not to do. And it kind of solves the problem of combining it so there's only one place for that guard to exist, but not in a great way. And so now if you look at the project aggregate and look at the project.cs class entity, there's a couple things to point out. First, it's using strongly typed IDs. And so its entity base is using a generic of itself, comma, its ID. And so when we work with this, it is also an integer under the covers, but if you try and pass it any arbitrary integer, it won't work. You have to pass it a project ID type anytime you want to work with project IDs. And so the intent is that we would use that pattern everywhere, and eventually it'll be in the template. I'm just kind of playing around with it in the sample, but we'll have strongly typed IDs then on all of the entities. And then the other thing to note is on line 7, this entity also has a name, but instead of it just being a string, it is a project name. And so in the constructor, we are doing similar stuff where we're passing in the name. And somewhere down below, there's an update name method as well, just like in the other place. But notice that neither one of these needs to do any checks to make sure that the name is valid. And the reason is because by using a value object for the name, since we have a general rule that names can't be null or empty, we can apply that policy to the project name type itself. Since we have a type now, we're not using a primitive. And so if you go to projectname.cs, you'll see how Vogen is used for that, or just go to definition on project name either way. So this is using Vogen. Line 10 is basically the secret thing that you need to do to make it work. You just decorate it with this value object attribute, give it the underlying type. In this case, it's a string. Optionally, you can tell it any conversions that you want generated. So in this case, I'm automatically generating a converter for JSON. And then inside of this, optionally, you can also add a validation static method, which will blow up if it's not valid. So if we try and create one of these and we, create it using an empty string or a null, we're going to get this invalid validation thing will pop up. And so it's impossible to create one of these without causing that exception if it's null or empty. And that makes it so that the entities don't have to do those checks at all. And it gets rid of the whole problem of, well, what if I have duplication and how do I, avoid that duplication and all that stuff. All right. So your entities become simpler and you're using actual types instead of primitives.
Very cool. And just to show that how it does blow up or complain, we don't put in a project name. So this is the code that's in the sample folder in the Ardalis Clean Architecture repo. This is not the template. This is a sample that would use the template.
Right.
And
And if you want to verify this, you won't necessarily be able to do it through the UI because we're going to catch it with higher level validation anyway. So it'll probably never get to
it shouldn't.
the domain model. But yeah, you can do a post of a new project and
So if we put it in an empty string, for example, tell it execute, it comes back. There's validation.
right. But that's coming from somewhere else higher up the stack.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Like it's the reason why we're using value objects in the domain model and the reason why they're throwing exceptions. They're not necessarily, well, typically with guard clauses, they would be throwing exceptions versus validation errors like we're seeing here, is that your domain model should never be able to get into an invalid state. If you have some way that you've managed to do that, that means there's a bug in your code somewhere. And so that's why, I generally treat it that way. I do believe Vogen, when these validation things fail, it throws an exception, but I don't think I have an example of that in here.
Yeah, I saw in their documents that mentions, and I put on the slides here, that there's this value object validation exception. This one right here.
Right. And I don't know that I created a unit test for that, although I probably should, or
Yeah.
some contributor could certainly do so.
Definitely. That goes back to the earlier slides where we said this is a community project. This is open source. So if you see something and you're like, oh, I have an idea. I mean, check out the repository, check out the discussions happening and issues and join in. All right. So these are the new things that are in Ardalis's Clean Architecture template version 10.0.0 and 10.0.1. The 10.0.1, it just updates the .NET Aspire, the starting point, so it goes to the Swagger. So we've got that all set as well. What questions do we have? So again, our demos today are in the sample repo, or in the clean architecture repo in the sample folder. Let me show you where that's at. If I go here, again, in the clean architecture repository, so it's Ardalis clean architecture on GitHub, there is a sample folder. So this sample folder is where we were showing Vogen. And then architecture decision records are in the docs folder and architecture decisions. And then the rest of the features are baked into the template as well as in the samples. So you saw that we included .NET Aspire. And with .NET 9, I mean, you can see that in our references as well. So we said there are a bunch of files that changed. So in our directory build props, we now have that target framework of version 9.0. In our directory packages, we have updates. It was to XUnit runner in Visual Studios, which is down here. Is the Aspire stuff. And then we also have past endpoints has an update. So we have a bunch of packages that do have some updates as well. And then with the web project, so source, clean architecture web, I did not show these, so that's why I want to show them here this way. And then it was in the entity framework. So this is here as we're doing the updates for .NET 9. Kyle added the private assets and the include assets for Microsoft Entity Framework Core Design. So these are the changes for the template. Let's go back to the slides. All right, so again, we didn't get too much into the clean architecture rules because we talk about clean architecture all the time. We talk about how it is got its layers and that we've got core and use cases and interface adapters and frameworks and drivers and how your core is isolated. So well, I always stress that it's separating the business logic from the technical decisions. So your core is your business logic or your domain logic, and your use cases can refer to core, but core doesn't know about use cases. Your interface adapters can know about the inner layers, but core does not know anything about interface adapters. And core also does not know anything about frameworks and drivers or the external libraries. This is a outside in. So we talk about clean architecture, we talk about the guiding principles, we talk about the layers and the what we call the rules. I'm going to use the term loosely. But I didn't cover that here in today's presentation because we assume at this point that you've heard clean architecture from us, whether it's through our previous webinars or if you were in .NET Conf 2024, Steve did a great presentation talking about clean architecture there. So that's why I bypassed the foundational today. But if you aren't familiar with it, I have links to all those. And so let's talk about where can you learn more about clean architecture. So .NET Conf happened again, beginning of the month. They did a YouTube stream for 3 days. The first 2 days were Microsoft announcements. And then the third day was a community day. And so there are various presentations from community members. Steve presented on clean architecture and I presented on event storming. But you can see these videos and they'll be in the thank you email as well. To learn more about .NET 9, learn about .NET Aspire and its changes. If you're in the Blazor realm, Blazor's there, Maui made some mentions. So you'll see all the different changes that happen with .NET 9 and C# 13. That's the only thing that we're seeing different wise is it's not C# 9, it's C# 13. So Nimble Pros Academy, if you haven't heard about it yet, you please should check it out, academy.nimblepros.com. So we're in the process of creating some courses. Right now, we've got Clean Architecture as our first course, got Identity Essentials and Early Access for a little less than a week left to go. But if you want to learn more about clean architecture, and especially where we talk about the layers and we talk about the rules, we talk about the guiding principles, we look at the technical decisions that are made in this template, and I also take you through creating your own solution with its own bare room projects without all those references. So that's a common thing that I know Steve and I have heard of, where it's like, well, why are there references to all these different packages? These are packages we use all the time. So with our template, if this is a design pattern we use all the time, if it's an architectural decision that we use frequently, it's probably in the template for that reason. But we also understand that not everybody has that same situation. So if you're not going to use it, take it out. But in the course, I walk you through the different ways that you can create your own solutions from scratch and script it to make it easier. We have a webinar on clean architecture with .NET 8 that does cover the clean architecture fundamentals in addition to what's in the template. And this happened before the course was even created, so rest assured this is where this starts. All right. What other questions do you have with .NET 9 or the templates? Say something else that I guess I could show from .NET 9 is the terminal output. I don't know if you've seen that. I'm going to set my starting project as web. And the reason why is it has a lot more output. I'm going to run that and I'll bring the terminal over so you can see what that looks like as well. So this is what the terminal output is. This was introduced in .NET 8 and is enabled by default in .NET 9. If you want to opt out of it, you can. There's different ways to do it. There's a MS build property and there's a TL::off that you could use. But this is what the terminal output looks like. Notice now you have clickable links and colors, things like that. I could say I want to look at my web application. It's getting cranky with me, but you can see output there. So the terminal I wanted to show because of the color formatting, again, this is default .NET 9. So when you update your Visual Studio for .NET 9, just know that you'll see this. All right. Then, if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out. In the YouTube description for this video, there is a link that you can follow, sign up, and get the thank you email for. And I will get that thank you email out here very shortly. So thank you for tuning in. And if you have any questions, be it clean architecture or modular monoliths or anything else that we talk about, event storming, modernizing apps, .NET 8, .NET 9, just feel free to reach out. Thank you.